being recorded, James? Oh, good. This meeting is now being recorded, and there's also closed captioning available, and you can find that by going up to the menu bar in your Zoom Zoom box and go to the three little dots that say more, and then just hover over that in the little drop-down menu that happens there. You can view full transcript, and that's where you can see the transcription of the meeting. So again, just for those who were popped on while I was talking, a reminder that if you could put your name, organizational affiliation, and if you have preferred pronouns into the chat box to introduce yourself, and if you're interested in signing up for public comment, indicate that in the chat box as well. So now I'm going to turn it over to Sam, who is going to offer a remembrance for a coworker who we lost.
So, as many of you have heard by now, the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability and the Portland community lost a shining light, dear friend and colleague, Tony Lamb, last Thursday. Tony was a force for racial justice, equity, and deepening community connections in the city. He challenged racist systems and institutions every day with a deep passion and commitment to making this city more just for Black people. He pushed where few would push, and he constantly called us to be our better selves, to see the bigger picture, to extend beyond and break down barriers. He understood the importance of reckoning with past racial injustice as a necessary step toward building a better city. And he presented that the racist history of planning to the PCEF committee during our January retreat. I love knowing that he was there to conspire on how we make the city more just, to joke and laugh with us, and to talk about another beautiful hike he would set out for the weekend. Tony was an unofficial PCEF teammate, and he had the highest hopes for what our program could do. He leaves behind many people who loved him and who are dedicated to carrying out his work and vision. I have no doubt we will see his legacy shine through in PCEF in the months and years to come. Tony took his own life at the age of 35 on July 30, the day of John Lewis's funeral. Earlier today was Tony's memorial service and burial in Loudoun, Tennessee. As colleagues have noted in his passing, Tony made good trouble and loved it when others did as well. James will read a quote from John Lewis written a couple years ago.
Do not get lost in a sea of despair. Be hopeful, be optimistic. Our struggle is not the struggle of a day, a week, a month, or a year. It is a struggle of a lifetime. Never, ever be afraid to make some noise and get in good trouble, necessary trouble. And so for Tony, we will now hold 35 seconds of silence to remember him and his 35 years. Thank you all. We'll miss you, Tony. Rest in power.
Thank you, James and Sam. We're going to start with committee member introductions, and then move to staff, and then members of the public. Andrea?
Andrea Hamburg, she, her committee member, and thank you so much. I really appreciate that moment for Tony.
Jeffrey?
Jeffrey Moreland, committee member, he, him. Rest in power, Tony.
Michael?
Michael Edenhill, he, him, committee member. Rest in power, Tony.
Robin?
Robin Wang, committee member, he, him. I had the opportunity to work with Tony on a couple of occasions, and I'm really deeply saddened about this news. I just found out about this earlier this morning. So my thoughts and prayers to his family. Thank you.
Faith?
Faith Graham, she, her, committee member, and may we all carry a bit of the light that Tony carried.
Francis?
Rainfeast Giacchino Viatoro, committee member, he, him. Rest in power, Tony.
Megan?
Megan Harsh, she, her, committee member, and rough time to make us do introductions while we're all crying, but thanks for the tribute.
Maria?
Maria Sippin, she, they, committee member. I'm gonna stop and smell the roses, admire more sunsets, and play a little more Nipsey Hussle for you, Tony. We got this.
Shanice?
Shanice Clark, she, they, committee member. I'm keeping Tony in my thoughts. Rest easy.
Okay, we'll move to staff. James?
James Valdez, he, him, PCEF staff. And yeah, rest in power, brother.
Janet?
Janet Hammer, she, her, PCEF staff. I saw a number of you at Tony's vigil, and I know that his light and his energy and his commitment will continue forward in this work.
Wendy?
Wendy Kufkin, she, her, PCEF staff.
And I'm Katie Lister, PCEF staff, she, her. Sam?
Sam Brasso, he, him, PCEF staff. Rest in power, Tony. I'm going to go ahead and move on to introductions of folks in our chat box. Anissa Pemberton, they, them, PCEF Coalition. Angela Parvadelli, she, her, Bureau of Planning and Sustainability staff. Lynn Lindgren Shooter, Housing Development Center, she, her. Linda Woodley, Energizing Diversity and Prisma Point. Jenny Hall, she, her, Energy Trust of Oregon. Scott Sander, he, him, Exceed Enterprises. Maggie Johnson, she, her, Director of Housing Development and Management for Cascadia Behavioral Healthcare. David Birchfield, he, CEM, President of Birch Energy Services. Emily Davis, Kelly Nonprofit Consulting, she, her.
James, is there anyone on the phone?
Let me check real quick. Yes, there's one number ending in 3378. I'll unmute them.
So for the person on the phone, if you could introduce yourself.
Angela Crowley-Cook, she, her, OCS.
And Angela, are you interested in signing up for public comment?
No.
Okay. And it looks like Robin texted his computer needed to reboot, so he'll be back with us in a minute. So it didn't look to me like anyone on the list, anyone indicated in the chat box that they were interested in providing public comment tonight. So we will move on to program updates. And James is going to give a program update first, and then Sam has a few quick things to say. So James, I'm going to advance to your slide. You ready?
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. So just want to share with everybody an update about the application support grants, which closed last Friday. We had the period open for about 3 weeks from July 10th to July 31st. As you probably remember from a few weeks ago, or now a couple months ago, these grants are intended to help smaller organizations get ready to apply for PCEF or other grants that focus on climate and equity. And we really focused our outreach and education and awareness about the opportunity in getting the word out through networks that were focused on Black, Indigenous, and people of color organizations. We had over 100 organizations submit, either as kind of primary organizations or in partnership with fiscal sponsors, and was really pleased to see that there were a lot of small community-based organizations who are new to the space, who we hadn't engaged with before. And, I just also want to name this, that Tony Lamb did a lot of great outreach and coordination and getting the word out in his network as well. And so in so many ways, this program and these resources are something that I'm proud of in honoring his legacy. And so, as I mentioned, the applications closed last Friday. Right now we're in a review, sorting, and allocation process, and we'll be allocating the $200,000 that you as a committee put aside for these grants in accordance with the guiding principles. And so these grants will prioritize organizations that serve disadvantaged and marginalized populations, in particular Black and Indigenous people. We anticipate doing that through the rest of this week and beginning of next week, and being able to announce the first round of recipients or awardees of these grants August 10th. So, or I'm sorry, in the week of August 10th, not on August 10th. But yeah, really excited to start getting resources out in the community. Also, along with this will be some training resources and opportunities for organizations to build their capacity. And so, yeah, this is a really important and valuable part of the work that's going to be moving forward to get organizations and people ready for PCEF.
Okay, and we'll come back to some of what we're learning here with the application support grants. I just wanted a couple other updates. I just wanted to flag and draw your attention to. We emailed you all yesterday about the next steps in the nomination process to replace Andrea Hamburg. So depending on where we go today, I think we may be able to take action next week, but I want to make sure I call attention to that. So please take a look at your city email if you haven't already done so, and just connect with us if you have any questions. We'll also be sending the bylaws ideally out here shortly, and ask that you all start thinking about your interest in leadership interest in leadership role interest on the committee, whether you're interested in one of the co-chair roles. And then I just another thing that's outstanding that a brief update, and it's not much of one, but it's a brief update, is just that the letter from the committee on the racist incident at 4th and Montgomery, there's been a little bit back and forth with the city on that. I will share the city's response to your letter here shortly, either this evening or tomorrow. And I plan to check in with Ramfis and then likely follow up with the committee in our next meeting. But I know Ramfis has been part of that, some of that correspondence. So Ramfis, please share your thoughts as well there if you have any.
Thanks, Sam. I mean, I think it's always a positive to hear back from the city. I think the correspondence, I think did share some of the letters and responses back to community. I think sorry, I'm being hijacked here in this meeting, but I think the only thing to highlight, I think it's just the reality that the city did not meet community's timeline in receiving its response. I think that was one thing worth highlighting. I think there are steps that the city's committed in terms of bringing forth some of these action items for a fair contracting forum in September. We can talk a little bit more about that. In addition to that, I think the city did offer for committee members to have an opportunity to connect with Lester Spittler, who is the Chief Procurement Officer within the city of Portland. And so I think, I don't know if now is worth time to discuss that or maybe later, but it'd be interesting to hear from committee members if there's interest to having a broader conversation with Lester and his team. I personally think that's a good, valuable next step. But I think, I hope that summarizes, I think, my thoughts, and then I think some potential next steps.
So maybe what I would share, well, I'll chime in. I know we haven't shared that correspondence. At least know that I will share that correspondence here afterwards, so you'll see the broader context of things that have gone back.
Megan?
Yeah, thanks for kind of tracking that and communicating back on it. And I think it sounds like a good opportunity to have that conversation. So we'd probably want to think a little bit about what the goals would be, but I think it's a good idea.
So what we'll do is, if there aren't any other thoughts on that, what we'll do is we'll share the correspondence and then at least just create space during the next meeting to talk about just, who wants to be part of that conversation, just what is the objectives of that conversation to the extent that I can share that and communicate that, set that up. But I think we can set that time next week, and I'll make sure that we follow up and just send all the correspondence your way so you can have that context going into it. That works.
Thanks, Ian.
Matthews. Okay, well, that is, I think that's the sum of at least the program updates for now. So I think just before we jump into the next couple slides, next really few slides laying out the small and planning grant point allotment, I just want to speak to, where we are, where we've been, and where we're going a little bit. Today, we'll be looking for the committee's approval of the content in the application and scoring grant documents for the planning and the small grants, so that staff can shift their focus to building out the RFP for release in September. But just getting to this point, I want to acknowledge the tremendous amount of work that has happened. Tremendous amount of work that's happened within the committee, certainly a tremendous amount of work that staff has done. And being so fortunate that we've had community with us through much of this, and what has otherwise been a really challenging time that unfortunately we don't acknowledge enough. Once we released, there's loads of work that happened at the subcommittee with other granting bodies, both public and private, work with a full committee to release ultimately that draft grant application and scoring criteria. Once we released that draft, we received feedback from well over 100 different respondents, with BIPOC communities reflecting anywhere from 25 to 33, about a third of our responses. We received comments through webinars, surveys, email, public testimony, and one-on-one meetings. Once we got that feedback, we then further went line by line through that feedback and proposed solutions and worked through solutions with a cohort of 4 BIPOC-led organizations and 1 low-income serving organization. While this was focused on large grants, much of that feedback did translate to small grants, and we closed out the workshop asking about planning grants at a high level. We then spent a few weeks, 4 meetings with you all, working through the large grant criterion and application questions in detail before you all approved those last week. So now, I think before we shift into the small and planning grants, I just wanted to reflect on the application support grants, which James gave you a preview of and which just closed. And I'm going to be careful, just as we haven't announced awardees yet, but in having reviewed the applicants at a high level, I believe that staff has done a phenomenal job in bringing in new organizations in this work. You all have done a phenomenal job in bringing new organizations in this work. But despite even those many meetings we had in developing that simple, what we called our 10-minute application, we did that work with, internal folks, other grant making organizations, city attorney's office. I know we will absolutely still adjust the process next time. Which is to say that even with something as simple as application support grants, there have been lessons learned, and that part of taking the approach we did does create extra work for the team, but it also makes the application a lot more accessible, and that often means that we have to address unintended consequences on the other side. So what this means is we have applicants that we would likely not have seen otherwise, and that's in no doubt a result of good outreach, your voices, people like Tony Lamb, and the great support of the community that Black and Brown folks actually see themselves in this program. We'll share some of those lessons learned here once we wrap up the process, but I can say that if only a fraction of these organizations submit future applications, it would still represent a huge changing of the tide. And I'm not even saying that a fraction is okay. I just want to note the importance of the approach we took there, and thank you all for your vision and support there. It'll now be on the team to carry this work forward, but just that first step is something that brings me a lot of joy, and I can't wait to share sort of how that shapes out here in the coming week. So I just wanted to make sure I ground a little bit of that, because there is some lessons learned even in that bit there. All right, and so as we, last week, as we pivot to small and planning grants, last week we shared with you all key differences between the large and small grants. And since then, we made minor adjustments to the small grants based on feedback we received from you all, and/or we connected with you individually to talk through your comments. Last week, we also received really great feedback on planning grants. And in response, we've improved on the questions and the scoring criteria. And Katie will speak to those in a little bit, as well as just some of the points. But I specifically just wanted to talk about an area where we got really good feedback and depth from you all in the conversation, but where we did not substantively change the questions. And that was really scoring and the questions around community engagement. I laugh at this because as we go through this, there's a lot of content we've gone through, and it even took us back, but it was after we checked back in as a team after the meeting and we started really working through the feedback. What elevated for us was a lot of our approach that we carried through with the large grants, the small grants, and the planning grants were really informed by, and at least for year one, really leaning hard and reflecting the feedback we heard from BIPOC organizations, but leaning a lot heavier on whether and putting a lot more prioritization and in a sense, trusting that if we place more weight on the organizations reflecting the communities that they serve, and we place more weight on the communities that we want to prioritize and making sure we prioritize those and put more weight there, that essentially those communities will be able to best speak to how they want to do their community organizing or community outreach. What we heard was that we didn't need to ask that level of details, and at times those sort of details were inappropriate to ask, and at times we would have difficulties in scoring some of those. And I know that there's the two sides to that I certainly am looking forward to that discussion as we sort of after we review the points, the two sides and the tension in between what it means to place more weight and trust in communities reflecting and prioritizing communities reflecting the organizations reflecting the communities they serve, but also recognizing that folks will come in that don't reflect those communities. So I wanted to make sure I spoke to that, because that was one area where we reflected on it quite a bit and came back to, that's sort of how we addressed ultimately this question around, this depth of question around partnerships and community engagement was that we were gonna ask it at a high level, and we did tweak the questions a bit. I don't want to discount that. We did tweak the questions and scoring criteria a bit, but we didn't make, I think, some of the substantive changes that we may have heard or asked for in the feedback last week. So before I turn it to Katie to speak to some of the point allocations and how things are shaping up. So you see it at a high level, as well as some of the more, 2 specific points where planning grants were adjusted. I want to create a little space for the committee to reflect on the comments I just made. We'll come back to this too. So we'll come back. Well, we'll give you another opportunity, but I think that was one I wanted to address before we turn it over to the changes that were made. Okay, Katie.
Okay,
Turn to you to speak to.
Yeah, and I'm not going to go through kind of the minutia of the language changes and things like that. We did that we incorporated based on your feedback. Those are all in the documents that we sent you, but did want to kind of highlight a couple of things, particularly on the planning grant, because that is where more substantive changes were made. So there were kind of 2 major changes that were made to the scoring for the planning grant, and the first was that we removed points that were associated with with the future. We removed a lot of the points associated with the future project, which is like the project that the planning grant is intended to manifest. And we did that for a couple of reasons. One, just kind of basic one is because it's the most uncertain part of the application. It's the least defined. And the other kind of more important reason, I think, is that giving points for the future project, and kind of especially on a scale where we're asking for more detail about the future project, really favored organizations that had the resources to spend time ahead of submitting an application for a planning grant to define some of that stuff. And we got a lot of input from members of the community, from small organizations, and from culturally specific organizations, indicating that they had not historically been resourced in a way that they had a lot of general funds that could be used to even just spend time thinking about what a project might look like, that their staff were kind of stretched in that way. And so we didn't want to create a point structure that that kind of favored larger, more well-resourced organizations. And one thing that does do is it kind of reduces, for the scoring panels, which y'all will be a part of, it reduces a little bit of kind of the vision of the project that you kind of are thinking that you're going to be helping to fund the planning for. And it will rely a lot more on just kind of looking at other things. Like Sam said, we definitely leaned into making sure that we were giving heavy points for organizations that reflect the communities that they serve, and that have a strong commitment to and kind of primary purpose to serve the PCEF priority populations. I'll just show you the kind of how the points weigh out. But I just kind of wanted to highlight that because we had a fair amount of discussion about that in the subcommittee meeting, and that is one that was removed in this grant. So this is, and there's one more change which I'll just speak to in just a second. And this slide does have a spelling error on it, which we can just ignore for the moment. But I just wanted to point out that this is sort of like the slide, like the pie charts that we showed you for the large grants. We wanted to kind of get them looking similarly, where we had close to 50% of total points in that kind of yellow and orange section, which reflect scoring criteria that give a preference for organizations that reflect the communities they serve, and then also have a priority of serving PCEF priority populations. So the project description and scope section looks pretty big, and the main reason for that is because it's the planning process. I mean, it's kind of where it's where the what is. It's what they're going to do. Robin asked a question at the last meeting about kind of how climate shows up in the planning grants, and so we did make a couple of changes, kind of in response to that. In response to that comment, because you'll see there's no like environment section in the scoring criteria. So one of the things that we did do is elevated climate elevated to the eligibility section of the application, a question around if the project that you are planning for has both addresses climate impact and advances social justice. So you have to kind of like check that box to be able to move forward to the next level and within one of the funding areas. And then we also incorporated that same kind of ethos around developing a project that addresses both climate and racial and social justice into the scoring that's associated with like the opportunity or problem statement. And this is kind of how it breaks out. Any questions or comments? Ramses?
Just to clarify with the changes to the scoring for the planning grants, there's no requirement that this needs to lead to a physical project.
No, there is not. Sorry, I felt like I answered that in a double negative.
Okay, yeah, no, thank you. That's helpful. So planning grant could be physical, it could be like a study, it could be a policy or planning for a policy. It's pretty flexible in what it's intended to serve and fund.
Yep, it's as flexible as small and large grants. Sorry, go ahead, Sam.
And in line with the category, the clean energy, the existing categories of funding: clean energy, workforce, green infrastructure, sustainable ag.
Yeah. Faith?
Yeah, thank you. I have a couple of questions, just reminder questions that I'm not remembering off the top of my head, and then maybe one overarching thing, but I might wait on that. What is the budget for the planning grants for this cycle?
It's up to 100. It's up to 100,000 per grant, and there was sort of a commitment to fund 1.5 million in planning grants, presuming that there are that many eligible applications.
Great. And is there a real or practical threshold on the number of points one has to get in the yellow and the orange in order to advance or qualify for funding? Did we set a threshold or a floor for those?
We did not.
And the reason I was thinking about these grants on a walk today, I'm thinking about some of the organizations that might apply for planning grants, and I was questioning my assumption that these planning grants really should be used for people who don't otherwise have capacity to do planning. And by capacity, I mean resources and staff capacity. And I realized that was an assumption of mine or a characterization of mine, but it might not be for the full committee or for staff that these dollars are intended for people that need them. So I'm curious how you all feel about that.
Robin, do you mind holding your question for just a minute so that we can get some feedback on Faith's question? Any committee members have opinions about that? Megan?
don't know if I have an opinion exactly. I tend to concur with you to a degree, Faith, and that's what it sounds like what Katie is saying too, and part of the emphasizing smaller and emerging or organizations that don't have capacity in that serve priority population. That's kind of what the shift seems to me to be about. That said, I feel like it might not always be that like easy to say an organization has plenty of capacity to do stuff. A lot of nonprofits are even well-funded ones have trouble. I don't know. So like, I guess it's to me not like well, those organizations clearly do have capacity and those don't. I feel like it doesn't sort out quite as clearly to me. But I think the prioritization of scoring should help support those that don't. I don't know how we'd filter out ones that have capacity.
I just want to add that I think that this, I agree, Megan, that I think that this reallocation of points does that in some way. But yeah, so I'm just curious how others feel about it.
Jeffrey?
Yeah, I feel similar to what Megan just said. I believe, but you have to, for prioritizing it, I don't think you can put a cap on it, because I think that's what Sam kind of spoke to, where you're kind of getting some pushback with other organizations. But I do believe what we're trying to do is put those people at the forefront and make it very clear that we're trying to support those people as much as we can and give them as much of a leg as we possibly can for them to get access to these funds. But then after that, whatever is left, then they can go to other organizations. But I think that's probably the extent to which we can do it, without getting too much pushback from other organizations.
Michael?
Yeah, I was just going to add that I think that that it really depends on what you're looking at, because you might have smaller organizations that only have 4 or 5 employees that do very large projects budgetarily, but really just are stretched thin on capacity, right? And they could really do a lot more with a planning grant. But they may look large in dollar figures, but actually be small organizations. And I'm thinking about like some of the development organizations out there, some of the CDCs.
Okay.
Robin.
Now, oh, sorry. Robin did say he would wait until folks just wanted to respond, who wanted to respond to Faith's question. Yeah, sorry, I was texting you that. But Ramfeast, you're only allowed to respond to Faith's question, or otherwise it goes to Robin.
Yeah, no, I'll try to keep it to Faith's question. No, I just want to echo what's been said. I feel like sometimes capacity is very subjective and hard to nail down for everyone. I think for many nonprofit organizations, planning is just a hard funding area. There's always a need to find funds. So it can be very subjective even and the need obviously is always there for both small, medium and large organizations. But I think how it's reshifted, it's still inclusive for all community groups. I think it's just giving an additional extra leg up for groups that maybe just have historically been not having access to grants like this. So I think I'm very supportive of the changes.
Okay, Robin.
Can I switch topics?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm looking at the project's description and scope scoring section, and I apologize, I did not have a chance to look at this in advance of the meeting. I noticed that there's some significant changes between the draft that you circulated last week and the version that you just sent out recently. And I know you talked about some of this already, but it seems like you consolidated some criteria, you reallocated some points. Can you kind of talk about, what for the stuff that we haven't covered already, kind of what was the motivation for some of the changes that happened to the section?
And you're talking about planning grants still?
Sorry, yes, planning grants, project description, and scope.
Okay. I did not
Scoring.
have that
So it's
document
page-
open, but I'm getting it open right now.
It's the bottom of page 9.
Okay.
And just to bring everybody up to speed about what I'm talking about, there were previously like 4 criteria varying from 5 points to 20 points. And now there seems to be 3 criteria all at 15 points each.
Yeah, so one of the fourth criteria, the one that was removed, was the one that we talked about, or that I talked about a little bit earlier, and that was sort of what the future project was, like what the project that you're planning for is, and kind of how well that future project aligns with PCEF goals of climate and equity. There were changes in the narrative to the first criteria, which is around the opportunity statement and goal of the planning. So it says the opportunity statement and goal of planning demonstrates understanding of issues and addresses climate and social justice. And the main changes there was that we wanted to incorporate climate and social justice, both to kind of integrate some climate-related points, or just it sort of reinforced that these are climate and social justice projects, that's what folks are going to be planning for. And so we need that to be clearly articulated when they talk about the issues that they are hoping to address by spending some time doing a planning project. And then the scope of the planning process is clear, manageable, and likely to succeed. I think that the main thing that we did there was absorb the criteria that was previously separated around the timeline into the planning process. It seemed, I think that timeline is, timeline within a project description can be a really, really critical piece, particularly with construction and large construction, because it can throw budgets so far out of whack, and seemed less worthy of that level of emphasis on a planning project. And then made some tweaks to the language in response to some of the feedback that we got from you all just about word choice and making sure that, certain important things were reflected, and trying to provide more guidance to folks who might be on the scoring panel. Sam, did you want to add anything to that?
Yep, I think that captures it.
Just one, go ahead.
Oh, no, you go ahead.
Just a follow-up question is the point allocation. Now it's evenly spread at 15, whereas before, one was at 20. I understand that you absorbed one. Just kind of curious what thought went into the reallocation of points.
This was as we sat back and we compared across the large grants, the small grants, and part of it is we go in, we dive deep, make adjustments, and then as we sort of leveled back out and started seeing, okay, how did it feel in large grants, small grants, planning grants? It was as we sort of did the math addition, we were like, it's really important that a planning process, folks can put in a planning grant for anything. It's really important that planning grants are focusing on priority population. So we made sure that had a significant chunk of points there. And sort of then as we went back and added up, okay, if you are focused on priority populations and you reflect that organization, just where do you get to? And can we make sure that is substantive enough that we are making sure that organizations that haven't historically done this but connect with community are in that driver's seat. So it was sort of, as we wanted to bring things in alignment with a large grant, and we said, okay, how do we, as we sort of step back, how do we do that after we cleared up, after we got the questions to be the right questions and got them the criteria to line up, then it was a matter of just making sure that the points reflected the values that we laid out in large grants.
And in some ways, Robin, I guess I would say that like those 3 criteria are now under project description and scope are now essentially why are you doing this? What are you going to do? And who are you doing it for? And that those felt like really substantive and kind of equally substantive. Do you have, is there something that feels off to you about that allocation?
No, nothing seems wrong, and I haven't had a chance to kind of really think it through. At a quick, high-level initial gut response, I think that's fine. I just brought it up because there were some, substantial changes from the draft. So I was more curious, kind of what thought went into making those changes. And if other committee members have a comment, please chime in. But at this moment, I don't have a preference or an strong opinion about what the point allocation should be.
No, I appreciate you highlighting that. Any other thoughts on planning grants before we move on? Okay. So this is these are just sort of two pie charts which show the distribution of points for the two kinds of small grants. So within large grants and within small grants, there are different points that can be awarded if you have a physical improvement, and then if you do not have a physical improvement. So the small grants with a physical improvement are the ones that are on the left, my left. Well, it's labeled so you can see, depending on if it's on your left or right. But I did want to note that that after we did the last draft of the small grants, we sort of went back again and did kind of what Sam was just talking about, where we, looked across all of the grants again and said, like, are we being kind of consistent in refocusing on ensuring that we have enough points going toward this preference for reflecting community and serving priority populations. And so we did adjust a little bit and took some and reallocated a few points from project description and scope and into the criteria that feed into those two categories that are in the yellow and orange. And we didn't eliminate any criteria from project description and scope. We just reallocated a handful of points so that the breakdown is more in line with the large grants and the planning grants. So you'll see that in the next updated version. Megan?
Hi, yeah, again, I appreciate the pie charts. They help me sort of see that. And I think I definitely think it's a good idea to keep that consistent attention and focus. I have two questions. One is I'm trying to understand the second pie chart. I get it's out of 80 points, not out of 100, right? But I don't understand. I don't understand how the serving priority population points got diminished. So maybe if you could walk us through that. I get the environmental and oh, and now I think I'm thinking it through the social, but maybe you can just talk us through that because maybe that's not what we want to do there, or I don't know if there's an adjustment we can make. And then a second point is I find this characterization of the pie chart really helpful, especially if it's sort of like across PCEF, here's what we're doing. And I'm wondering if we're going to be showing that to applicants in like this kind of way, and to kind of drive home that this is maybe it will be confusing on top of the already things we're sharing with them, but I find it helpful.
I think that with the assistance of some folks who are good with infographics and those sorts of things, we definitely could help share that, like, this sentiment. What's happening with the distribution of points for projects that do not have physical improvements is the same thing that happens with the large grants. Is that there are a bunch of criteria within the workforce benefits section that are focused on providing benefit to priority populations, and so they don't have access. They don't have access to those points just because they're not going to be hiring construction workforce. That's really the single. I think that is the totality of what's happening there. And then I think that you had a question about social benefits. So that section is absorbed in the social benefits section goes almost entirely to serving priority population and preference for reflecting. I think that there is one point from that section that ends up in this other category.
I think, Katie, the only other change was that for no physical improvement, you couldn't create physical improvements for priority populations as well. So those points wouldn't have been there. That was the one other set of points.
Yep, that's true.
Workforce.
Ranfis?
Thanks. I think this is helpful to take a step back and look the macro. I think this will just sound very arbitrary on my end, but I think, always it's helpful to see things rounded out to a multiple of 5, but I think maybe that's just a very arbitrary way of scoring things. But I guess what's kind of sticking out as we take this step back and looking at the macro in all our conversation around making sure that small and emerging groups, that this small application piece is inclusive, as we design this application to make sure it's inclusive for small and emerging organizations, and all the work that we've done, that in comparing this with their planning grant, it does stick out that we don't have 5 additional points for a small or emerging organization. So I think just wanted to point that out as a design, and for all our conversation on this very topic. I think it just sticks out more so now as we look at this.
Shanice?
This chart is definitely helpful, just echoing that. I think as I'm processing the connection or the bridge that the planning grants are making to the overall process, and maybe it's just a part of me that needs to do my own clarification, but looking at the breakdown, I think basically to Megan's question of with the physical and no physical improvement, how we might allocate for serving priority populations. I don't recall this being a conversation in the large grant criteria, so I'm curious of why we would allocate or what makes the rationale different here on the impact of what these funds do versus how we are allocating for priority populations generally. So that's, I guess, where a question that I'm still sorting through. But.
Sam, I saw you lean forward and unmute yourself.
I know it's partially that I don't know if this is so different in the large grants, and it's beckoning that I'm like, do I need to go back and open the charts for that? But I was just digging in my head because I don't, Shanice, I guess there are different elements in the large grant, but I don't think there's a similar thing that happens with large grants that don't have a physical improvement as well. It's just that I think if I remember right, I'm trying to think, yeah, there is. That's right. And one thing I would just point at the chart, when you see the chart, these numbers are the points. The visuals reflect the percentages. So if you look at sort of that chart as you see it, so even though there's less points, right, on the no physical improvement, there's 13, 17 points. Visually, you see that it's still not quite half. And I think we got to do we can run the math real quick, but it's closer to 40% or so, 45%. So visually, it's still that we wanted to show the difference in points. Yeah, visually, it's still reflecting percentage. So I just want to know it isn't only 30%. It isn't 30%. It's 30 points out of, and I'll do the math real quick here to answer that question if it helps.
Was that the question, Shanice?
When I look at the point breakdown, I'm seeing with these that the project scope remains the same but the priority in most of the others, right, are smaller. And so curious about that rationale that we're making that's different, that I'm assuming, it could be wrong, is different when we're saying the scope is more important when there's no physical improvement. And then it makes me curious about examples of what a quote unquote non-physical improvement project looks like, and just pondering.
Yeah, so I think, I'm not sure if I can answer all of that, but I will give it a little bit of a try. So when the majority, we don't really know, because we don't know what's going to come in the door in the terms of applications, what people are thinking about. But I presume over time, especially, that the majority of projects that PCEF will fund that don't include a physical improvement component will be in workforce development and training, just because we have that target allocation of 20 to 25%. So we should be getting those kinds of applications, and most of those wouldn't have a building something associated with them. But there are a lot of other kinds of projects that we'll certainly also see, but I imagine that a lot of them will be workforce development and training. And I see Michael's hand and Ranfis's. Michael?
So I guess I'd like to continue on with Shanice's what she was saying, was just well, at least I think that with workforce development, that serving priority populations is almost more important, right, or equally important. I think that if I were to make this pie chart, I would drop the budget, environmental, and project description scopes by a couple points, and add 6 more points into serving priority populations, just to weight that a little heavier, because workforce development, we really do want to serve priority populations in that. And so I think that as we drop project description and budget, I don't know, however we do that, I'd like to see the weighting of serving priority populations be a little bit heavier for no physical improvement, for workforce and other sort of developmental programs.
Thanks, Michael. Ranfis?
Yeah, can you, clarify physical here? Because I guess it's not synonymous with just physical construction. So is it more encompassing than just physical construction? I just want to make sure, because it sounds like it's not synonymous, but I just want to clarify the definition here of the difference between physical improvement and physical construction. So I just wanted to clarify just on that.
Sam, I'm going to let you speak to that.
I mean, Ramses, actually, in this instance, I mean, there's going to be work to figure out the wording. So, but I will say the intent, because the wording, that all needs work. But it is meant to be construction. It is meant to be building things. And so that is physical. You're making, physical capital improvements to a site. So it isn't your education programs. It isn't it certainly isn't the workforce development, but it is you're building something.
So to clarify here, agriculture, that would fit under non-physical?
I want to think through the questions here real quick to make sure I'm lining everything up in my mind. If it has no physical improvement associated, if there's no physical improvement associated, you will not be answering. If you have an agriculture project and has no physical improvement, you would not be answering any of the workforce equity related questions. And so I'm trying to think about other questions that would have related to physical improvements that may or may not relate to ag. And that's where I want to double check that here. If you give me just a second, and Katie, if you beat me to it.
There are a couple of questions in the environmental benefits that relate to like ag and tree planting. So for GHG sequestration, those types of, I think GHG reduction and or sequestration. But for all of the workforce points, which is sort of like the primary difference between those two, it's the real split in points. There's actually kind of three splits, but the primary split is between do you have a construction project and do you not have a construction project? And so we did go back and forth. At one point in the draft, I think we had physical/capital improvement and or infrastructure kind of all over the place. And so we have been working on simplifying, but obviously need to work with some other folks, as we are starting to do with the large grant criteria on our comms team, to kind of get all of that dialed in so that it's more clear. But for the workforce stuff, Ramses, it would not include any like regenerative agriculture project unless they were going to like build a barn. And then that would be, a construction project.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Yeah, I think just clarity as that gets defined is helpful, and then helps in terms of the consistency and clarity for, I think, applicants which area they're going into. So I think of like landscaping. Landscaping with context could be considered something within construction. Sometimes, especially like if you're thinking about like landscaping within, like, say, a light rail project. But when it's landscaping within a different context, I think, so I just kind of highlight that because there's some gray areas. I think just clarity is just helpful. But I think the explanation that you and Sam, I think, is helpful. And it sounds like we'll get some more clarity on that soon.
Yeah. And go ahead.
There's pretty much there's a third chart that really should be, it's breaking down. I mean, this is the fundamental crux that we're designing something for many different types of projects. And so there really is the sort of workforce development, education, consumer behavior, stuff where you're not doing any physical improvement at all. And so there's a set of environmental points that you would not be eligible for and we wouldn't hold against you there. There's a set of workforce points that you wouldn't be eligible for and we wouldn't hold against you. Then there's this middle ground where I think it's Ramses, it's what you're talking about, where you're doing you are doing something with physical improvement, but it's not construction. And so you are eligible for additional set of environmental points, and you are eligible for an additional set of social benefit points, but not the workforce points, because we wanted to really focus that section on construction. And then there's the projects that have actual construction in them, and so that you have sort of the full suite of points available to you. So that's there's one more. There really was one more pie chart there that could have been there.
Shanice?
It's helpful to hear this process a little bit more, and that notion of construction being associated with how we're thinking of allocations, especially for priority populations, as it relates to these both of them. I think I'm having some dissonance and understand at the same time that there is a need to focus in a specific way on how projects will manifest for our beneficiaries. I'm thinking about organizations like CEP, might do community education projects or trainings for families, and potentially this grant or PCEF could be a space to just do that. That's Spanish speaking only, or build their capacity in multilingual spaces. So I think that the PCEF and the ways that it can build capacity, there are just ways outside of, there are projects outside of construction that have different levels of impact, and that ultimately, in a pool of other grant applicants, I definitely would want to prioritize similarly, right? If there's some folks who are saying a project is going to be prioritized to our beneficiaries. So I guess I'm struggling with it. I'm struggling with not putting as much weight. It can be a both and potentially, right? And so the piece of focusing on this is something I understand, and at the same time, can the impact not be not prioritizing it for other projects as much? It just doesn't feel like something I'm resonating with, and just wanted to share that and see what other community members think too, because I've spoken already on.
I want to just plant this fact so that as you think about how you all may want to address this, I want to respond to Shanice, and I think because it may help because there's ways you can adjust that to get, I think, Shanice, at what you're talking about. Between the with physical improvement and no, and it may be a direction to us to bring them and make them all consistent too. But between the physical improvement and no physical improvement, with physical improvement, preference for reflecting a priority population and serving a priority population is associated with 45% of the points. With on the no physical improvement, preference for reflecting and serving priority population is associated with about 42.8% of the points, so 43% of the points. So I know that the numbers may not, but it's close. But you're right, Shanice, that it is lower. So I just want to make sure that's out there, and I think there's a few ways that we can get there. But I want to make sure you know that.
So, but what I'm saying is we've got 45 over here. I'm generalizing. 45 over here, 42 over there. In addition to that, the scope, it just feels like in retrospect. So if we're looking at the percentages for the no physical improvement section, the scope and description is inevitably just as much weight, right? And I guess what I'm saying is, can that just not be quote unquote a comparable level of, can it be in comparison to the other ratios that have also shifted, not also be 44%, because I think that brings it just means different. It means the thing, right, when you're comparing those other categories.
It's a point to you all.
So we do have a number of people who have had their hands up. Ramses, did you have something? I saw you leaning forward with your finger up as well as your hand up, but did you have something that was very timely?
In terms of the question on ratios, the pie on the right doesn't equal 100, so it's not properly being used as a pie. So I think in terms of ratios, it's difficult to compare to the pie to the left. I'm not a math expert here, but I think it's
so the pies are showing points, but the sizes of the wedges are reflective of the percent that they're showing. So like Sam said, with physical improvements, about 45% belongs in the yellow and orange, or is in the yellow and orange, and with no physical improvement, about 43% is the yellow and orange. But what's sort of reflected, the numbers on there are the points.
But your math, Ramses, the pie on the right does, or which the no with physical improvement does add up to 100. Am I mistaken?
Yes, it does.
It does add up to 100. Yeah.
So we're gonna, Michael, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I was wondering where innovation grants fall under here and where possible land acquisition, which some of the ag businesses, Mudbone Grown, et cetera, talk to us about land acquisition, lease or buy. I'm wondering where those are going to fall in, and if those kinds of projects are going to fall outside of this also. And yeah, I guess those are kind of my questions. And
I'm not sure, Sam, we both leaned forward at the same time. So I think that land acquisition would be, I mean, it will have to fall within the category of the project that people intend to do with that land, right? So if it is a land acquisition for the purpose of putting up a wind turbine, I mean, we're probably not going to see that in Portland, but if that were the case, then it would fall into the category of clean energy and with a physical improvement. If it was for developing regenerative agriculture, it would fall into the regenerative ag sort of section. The innovation one, I think, is pretty tricky because we just really don't know what we're going to get. And so I don't have a really good answer for that one, except to say, I guess, that a lot of the criteria that kind of you all have been instrumental, along with the public feedback, in developing the values that are reflected in those criteria will have to manifest in those kind of innovation projects, or like as it's defined in the code, really it's like an other category. That felt like not a super satisfying answer, but I think that is where we're at right now. Andrea?
I mean, I had the same kind of set of questions, things that don't quite fit these categories, which, probably the committee will answer as applications are reviewed, which makes it hard right now since we're trying to determine how to score things. But I was thinking, so Katie, you mentioned that the no physical improvement grants might very logically be job training grants. And I was thinking about a job training model where organizations are doing built environment or construction projects as part of their job training, which suddenly made me wonder about how we've handled scoring between these two things, where it might actually be both a job training project and a physical improvement project.
Sam, did you want to answer that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, in the realm of, for instance, there's going to be things that are going to push this. So I think your point that you just acknowledged there, Andrea, is that there's some things we're going to get and we're going to say, oh, that wasn't designed, and we're going to have to figure out how to address that. And that's just going to be an element of it. But I think generally when please, I'd look to others on the committee who, Ramses, others, Michael, have experience on this. When we think about like the pre-apprenticeship programs, you know, we certainly think about those really as no physical improvement. Those really are training programs. But I suppose that we certainly could have a program that, and we could, and we expect that, and we think we could have something that has both as well, physical improvement. And I think that we would be able to score, because this was one of those things that went in our minds, that we think when we designed this, that we were thinking about projects that you could touch on both, and so we should be able to score both. Where it gets addressed is a lot of it is in the project scope. It's sort of like we have the points in the project scope. Does this all make sense? But you would get the points for the physical improvement. You get the points for the environmental benefit, the social benefits, and then you'd have to answer a certain amount of details around the scope, and we just expect the budget to be higher and then to align with some of that. So I think we have something that can hold that, but it will be pushed and tested.
Ramses?
Well, I think there are other folks ahead of me. I'll wait till Shanice.
Okay. I think it's just Shanice, unless Andrea, Andrea, I think just still has her hand up. Oh,
I am, for some reason, unable to put my hand down, so it is not still up.
Oh, now it's down. Somebody took it down for you. Shanice?
My hand was still up too.
Oh, it's you after all, Ramses.
Oh, what? Darn. Yeah, I mean, I think to your question there, Sam, I think, yeah, I mean, I think when you're training for pre-apprentices, again, I'm not the expert here, but, you know, that's, they won't be working, but I think the goal is you want them to work. And I think that's maybe the role of other, the other grants. I mean, I think you always want, and I think there's been a conversation within our committee, but how these things interconnect, and the interconnection of all these grants are really important, because they're not as super siloed. I think we want pre-apprentices trained, and then we want them to be hired. And I think the hiring is a challenge. But I think, again, like if this were to go to an apprenticeship program, if an apprenticeship program were to apply, part of the apprenticeship requirement is on-the-job training. So I think there is a piece there that, you know, maybe we might be missing some information around workforce hire and hours, or on-the-job training hours, if you will. Yeah, I mean, I'm digressing on that. I don't know if that's helpful. There is, I think, so I'm still kind of caught up on the pie chart on the left on the non-physical. So it's meant to add up to 70?
Yes.
And then just to clarify, so if it adds up to 70, I don't know if I recall this correctly, but the idea was that it would be adjusted so it was out of a score out of 100.
Yeah, it's everything, it all gets normalized to a 100-point scale.
So in that normalized to 100-point scale, how would the pie chart on the left look different?
It would look the same. The distribution of points is the same. It just is essentially normalized so that we can have one ranked list, and so that projects with physical improvements don't always, aren't always ranked the highest, just because there are more criteria by which we're scoring them.
So it won't.
It won't change the shape. It won't change the shape of the wedge.
Okay, so if we move this to 100 points from 13%, so preference for reflection at 13%. Sorry. 13 points right now out of 70. Just to take this example, those 13 points will look different when it moves to 100. But
they're more like 18.5.
Okay.
I think I'm just going to interrupt. These pie charts are a normalized scale, right? If you were to not look at the numbers in it, if you were not to look at the number on each one, the actual pie chart itself is a normalized scale.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to catch up on math. I always thought that pie charts were supposed to equal to 100. So that's my assumption around pie charts equaling 100. So
the whole circle is 100. So
right.
Yeah, the points don't need to add up to 100. The whole circle, the area in the whole circle for both circles are the same.
We're all doing math in public. It's dangerous.
Each one's worth 100%. I guess would be the easiest way to say it. Each pie circle is worth 100%, regardless of what points are attached.
So we'll get an update on what the points will look like for each of these sections.
Yeah, we could certainly do that and kind of normalize all of the criteria in the different tables. You'll end up seeing like numbers that are not whole numbers when we do that, and we try to make everything into whole numbers, but so it'll be a little less clean looking. But Megan and then Jeffrey.
Hi, I feel like, I'm sorry we're belaboring this point a bit, but I think what I'm hearing from folks is like a preference, well, at least among some folks who've spoken, to try to get that chunk of the pie chart that's about serving priority population reflecting to be more equal across the like various categories of grants we have. And just between this like particularly physical and non-physical, you know, I talked a little bit about it with you and Sam yesterday and reviewing the table that comes with this, with the detailed, and I do wonder if maybe we are trying to create a distinction that we don't need to be doing, because the reason we get to these pie charts is because we cut out some of the categories. For example, project reduces cost for low-income communities or communities of color. That could happen from a non-physical project, like from growing food, and you distribute that in the CSA, so it reduces costs. So I kind of wonder if maybe that, like maybe we leave all those criteria in somehow, and projects just answer ones that apply to them, and then there's when it just doesn't apply, they don't lose. I don't know, but like it seems like the choice around physical and non-physical is leading to some confusion about like projects won't even know, and then it also has the added challenge where it's leading to this weird pie chart problem where we're not quite getting the distribution we want. And it's weird that sometimes budget would have like 10% in some projects, but like more like 13% when we do that. So I just wonder if there's a way we can go back to using the same weighting for all of them, but then just have like a when it doesn't apply. I don't know, you know, I'd probably have to think about it a little bit more, but like I think there's a way to do that. And I'm thinking, yeah, about food growing. It could do a lot of those things in social benefits that get cut out when you say, oh, it's not a physical project. Or, but is it if you're growing garden beds? That kind of is a physical project. So I'm a little flustered on all that.
So I would note that that one is the one that when Sam said we really should have 3 charts, which would have made this even better. That regenerative ag would be one that would fit in there, right? Because we did recognize that, you know, food was one of the examples that we gave for potentially lowering costs. So some of those do apply. I do think that we do need to be careful that we don't just only score people on exactly what applies to their project, because then the committee isn't making any sort of statement about the things that they want to see in their projects and valuing those that have the things that they want to see in the projects. So it's a tricky balance, obviously, with this applying to so many different kinds of projects.
Yeah, I kind of wonder though if we could just leave like social, well, in here it's called social benefits, 20 points. It's a different
Yeah.
different categories than we're using here. And I get it, there's like 2 kinds of categories and you've recategorized it here so that we could see. But I just wonder if you could leave those overall percentages the same, even though there might be less things that add up to that total.
I mean, we did, this was a point of debate. I mean, so I think there will be, and maybe I'll just, I don't need to say too much on this, but this was a point of debate where, you know, we went from projects with over, you know, this was a similar thing when we had projects over on the large grants, when we had projects over $500,000 at a single site versus below $500,000. Would we still allocate, you know, a full 20 points for someone if their answer was just one single question based on their strategy versus someone that had to really provide a pretty in-depth response to a bunch of questions. And so it was sort of just trying to also align points with the effort and how much we wanted to see in there. So this was something we did talk about, but that's just what happens is when you have less things to score. It's how do you just place more weight on some of these questions, and how much relative value does the question have, and how much does the question really tell us for the amount of points that you're getting for it? So it's a fair question though.
Shanice, and then Jeffrey, I did see that your hand was up, but now it is down. I wonder, did you have a comment?
Megan pretty much said what I was going to say. So I'll just for the sake of moving the conversation forward, I'll defer.
Thought you had the solution, Jeffrey. Next time. Shanice?
Yeah, I think I'm aligning with Megan on this piece of this table on the right. I'm not feeling like there's a strong reason to navigate allocating points differently. I think that there's some pretty strong there's a pretty strong space that PCEF can hold, and the lens that we bring to funding these projects, whether or not they require a different level of work teams. I think those are not necessarily. I'm struggling with prioritizing that, and I think that I think we should take it off.
And so just to make sure that I'm understanding, Shanice, what you're suggesting is you're talking about just holding the size of the distribution constant regardless of the number of criteria that apply to a specific project.
The serving priority population criteria, I'm wanting us to apply to every project, and so I think the answer is yes. Okay. And of course, there are nuances, right, with some of these things that we're discussing, and there's time to get in the weeds with that. But I think the core criteria that I'm looking at: environmental benefits, scope, budget, and priority population. Those kinds of overarching umbrellas, I would want those to be. I wouldn't want to stray from where we want to go.
I'd love to hear from the rest. I think this would be one to hear from the rest of the committee. I mean, I think the point of, to bring some resolution to it. The project description and scope is 15 points on both of these, which means with a project with physical improvement, it's 15%, and with projects with no physical improvement, it is closer to 21%. So so you see the difference there. And I think our rationale, I just want to share, our certain rationale was that if you don't have a physical improvement, you don't have as many environmental benefits to sort of speak to that. The way you speak to what you're actually doing in the project description and scope is more important for us to understand. And so we want to place more weight there. I mean, I guess there was an implicit understanding of that, but I want to make sure I want to share sort of how we navigated and how we rationalized a little bit of that. and I'd love to hear from the whole committee. And I can state what I sort of just shared a little bit again, if it helps.
Oh, Andrea, you're muted if you're.
I don't know why I cannot raise my hand or lower it myself, but
Okay.
put me on the stack.
Okay. Michael, and then Shanice, and then Andrea. Oh, not Shanice. Shanice put her hand down. Michael.
Okay, so I am going to look at this really quick. Hang on. So I agree that environmental benefits are harder with no physical improvement. We have a third sort of thing that's going to cover kind of agriculture, from what I understand, a slightly different pie chart, which I'm assuming is going to have higher environmental benefits, higher weight to environmental benefits. For no physical improvement, I'd still like to see higher weight for serving priority populations. And I think that project description and scope can remain the same in that. I understand why environmental benefits are lower in that because, you know, a training program doesn't necessarily have the same weight of environmental benefits. Project description and scope, I think that I don't know if that's where you pull the weight from, would be project description and scope, or from budget or other. I don't know where, but I would like to see more weight on the serving priority populations. And with the understanding that no physical improvement does not include a lot of the ag section.
Right, or like tree planting. Jeffrey?
So we've been discussing, there's a lot of interconnectedness between the physical and non-physical. I think that's what we've seen the consistency with all the discussions. The only difference between the physical and non-physical, from what I'm hearing, is that as far as the percentage goes, if you look at the orange and the yellow, it's 45% of the total, and on the non-physical, it's 42%. So we're only off by 3% if we're looking at it between community benefits and then the rest of the project. If I'm just to simplify it, if I'm not too far off base. So we're talking maybe 1 or 2 points, maybe adding to serving priority populations to make it to make them kind of match, I guess. It seems like we put more weight in the preferencing for reflecting in the non-physical one than we did in the physical, if you just look at the pie chart itself. But as far as the community versus the project itself, I only see a 3% difference, if I'm looking at this correct. Am I interpreting this correctly?
You are.
Okay. So with that being said, I don't see why taking a couple of points off of the project description and scope would be a big deal, and turning it to the serving priority populations to make them both kind of match as far as the community versus the project itself. Or I'm not really sure, is the other supposed to represent whatever kind of project it is? Like you have 10,
No,
you have 10 points for other and then 5?
Other it's a kind of a smattering of different stuff. So the financial management is in other. There is 1 point that is available for folks who have more than 6 employees and provide health benefits to their employees. It's from several different sections.
Okay. So yeah, between other and project description and scope, unless everybody feels like those aren't the right ones to take it from, I don't see why we wouldn't just take maybe 1 or 2 points to even it out.
Sam, I seemed like you were wanting to say something.
I'm not going to say anything. No,
You're not going to say it?
Good conversation.
Okay. Ranfeast?
If I understood correctly, if it's just, I'm just trying to make sure I understand, Jeffrey, your proposal. It sounds like you're asking to reshift some of the weight from preference for reflecting to serving priority populations and then shifting some of the project and scope to serving to sort of create a comparable pie chart on both sides. Did I hear that correctly? Sorry if I didn't hear that fully.
Pretty much, yeah.
Michael?
And I know that this is just a couple percentage points and it's not a big deal. For me, it is the optics. If we're presenting pie charts, I don't want the optics. When I look at these, I can actually physically like see that like, oh, serving priority populations isn't as important for workforce development, right? That's what the pie chart says to me. So I want the, I mean, like logically, I know the percentage points are like so close, it doesn't really matter. But looking at it, I'm like, oh, serving priority populations is not important in no physical environment. Like it's not nearly as important, right? And so I think that for me, it's just if we're sending these out into the public as part of the proposal, and I would like to see that looks also a little bit more important, right? I want the optics to say it's more important, even if the percentages are super close.
So I want to, oh, good. I was trying to check. I didn't know if Jeffrey had a hand up. I think what I'm wondering is if we can, so what we could do is we can carry through and make adjustments so that the percentage, the preference for reflecting and serving priority populations are really from a percentage basis equal in both the physical improvement and the no physical improvement. Doing math in public is hard, but I think we can do that. So I'd rather not subject us fully to. So what I think we can bring that over and share that back. If that's the crux of it, because what that will do is, I think what we'd be able to do is make those changes, send those off so that we can start working on them and bring them back to you all next week just to share this is how that looks and confirm that. But I want to make sure that is the crux of it, and I don't want to, because I know certainly our hope was to get to a place of approval today. So, but I also want to know, is there other things there? That change is something we can change. Because I hear I appreciate, Michael, you putting it that way, that it is, in the end, it's we may be talking about small points, but it's about what it reflects. And I think that there's a piece we missed here in how we went about this, and I think we can make sure we capture this and make sure it lines up, and frankly screen those across the planning grant as well. So I think but I want to make sure that if that's before as we go around, if that captures at least the sense of the discomfort, unless there are other things.
Andrea, I see that your hand is up, but I wanted to let Maria go first since she hasn't spoken yet tonight.
Sorry, I was just here doing math in Excel because I can't look at distracting graphics. I understand everyone's comments, Michael's especially, how, the way that we present data can impact how we make decisions, and then also how people interpret the decisions we make. So the graphics are faulty. I think it would be helpful for me to start with, let's say, looking at one of them only with physical improvement and comparing the different elements and domains and their percentages with respect to the other percentages in the pie before like seeing the pie right next to it and then like doing the whole comparison. But I think some of the areas that matter a lot to me are the serving priority population slices of the pie, looking at environmental benefits with respect to that as well, and just thinking about how they're all represented in the scoring in a percentage manner, not necessarily points. I think we need to compare pies of different scales and ratios, and it's hard for, like, it's kind of unfair that you threw this at us like this, because I know we want to make thoughtful decisions, and this really threw a wrench in the way we process stuff in public. So good thing to note for the future, but I think that's why I've been just letting it all sink in and doing my own math. So almost tried to share this new calculation with folks, but that's just not helpful right now.
Thanks, Maria. Andrea?
Thanks folks. I really appreciate, Michael, you pointing out that the couple of percentage points matters here. And I know we've spent a lot of time talking about how much of the pie the project description and scope takes up. And I kind of want to actually shift this to how much the budget takes up. We've talked a lot about wanting to be accessible to organizations that have lower capacity, less match, et cetera. And these are the small grants. And when we talk about a no physical improvement grant, and the budget takes up this much of a percentage, that raises a couple of flags for me. And for me, the project description taking up a bigger percentage of the no physical improvement grants isn't an issue, because when you look at how the points are awarded for projects with physical improvements, there are places where we learn a lot more about the project. So there's kind of actually other points that are awarded that are project description points for that physical improvement. But the budget weighs less heavily in that than it does in the no physical improvement. So I'd like to see us move a little bit of the weight of that to the serving priority population in some way. That feels like the place where we should be de-emphasizing that and emphasizing the target population.
Jeffrey?
After hearing Andrea, I would like to just echo what she said. I actually agree.
Michael indicated a thumbs up as well. Francis? Megan?
Just to clarify, so there is a separate pie chart for regenerative agriculture?
Yeah, there are, the way that the scoring, there really should be 3 pie charts for things that have some physical improvement but no construction activity. So regenerative agriculture and like tree planting for green infrastructure.
Okay, so these changes that we're talking about on the no physical improvement, it's just strictly on workforce, or is it meant to encompass the other ones? Just trying to clarify as we make a decision on this.
It will slightly play out. It will slightly play out also on the regenerative agriculture, or green infrastructure that has no construction. Only because you'll get back your environmental benefit points. You'll be closer to 20 points on environmental benefits, but you will not have a lot of the. So it will still play out. And so maybe what I think we can do here, if we're hearing you right, I want to make sure we are hearing this correctly, is generally we haven't heard I guess a pushback or a concern with the way with physical improvement percentages are laid out, that folks are okay with that, but want to see consistency in the percentages, so the relative percentages, relative weights of consistent with what's in the with physical improvement across and we want to make sure that on no physical improvement as well as on no physical improvement, but with a sustainable ag project, that the budget is still the same size as the wedge. So it's not that the budget is 10 points, but that it's the same size of the wedge. We don't want the wedge to get bigger. So that if the wedges on the with physical improvement look correct, we can come back and I think make adjustments to the no physical improvement and the projects with sustainable ag. The difference, maybe that the only difference is that we would still we'd ask that, are you okay with sacrificing the environmental wedge and increasing the project scope? That may be the one place where we would ask for a difference, is that it felt for no physical improvements, particularly not the sustainable ag projects, but no physical improvements, that there's not so much you can ask on the environmental points. So can we reallocate those environmental points to the project description and scope? And I'm trying to think through whether that, and we, let me stop talking there.
I know that's helpful. I think look forward to that. I think I've been in strong agreement with what's been said thus far within the lens of workforce. And I think as we think about like the adjustments, you know, I'm just trying to step into the shoes of like someone applying from the regenerative agriculture. It does create a different context answering some of these questions around preference for reflecting versus, you know, preference for serving priority populations where, you know, if you're in regen agriculture, you're probably trying to serve a specific population. Other times you're just trying to operate more of a business and be successful. So I'm trying to, in my head, as I'm asking this question, I'm trying to sit from the perspective of different stakeholders on this. But I appreciate, I think, all the work and thinking of folks and strong alignment with what's been said thus far, especially in consideration for workforce. I think for me, the only, I think, thing that kind of sticks out still as I noted early in the beginning of this discussion, which is when we first set out to design this small grants program, it was explicitly stated the importance of designing this to be inclusive for small and emerging organizations. And so I do still raise that question of the difference that we're seeing here in the planning, which is we give 5 additional points to small and emerging groups. And that to me still sticks out because I know I've been a stickler in like making sure that there are good standards and like some kind of a race to the top approach, but that tension between the questions that we're asking to nail down the benefits of the Portland Clean Energy Community Benefits Program and being inclusive for small and emerging. So I think I just want to note that because I don't think that I think we've just been kind of a little inconsistent on that end. So I just wanted to note that since we've heard I think a lot of advocacy to make this inclusive. So I just wanted to note that that's still inconsistent. On my personal end, on my personal perspective, it still feels inconsistent.
Megan has her hand up, and I just wanted to note that there have been some conversations in the committee about having kind of a preference for small and emerging organizations in the small grants program, and a little bit of hesitation around not wanting to send like a signal that this is, you know, if you're small, go for the small grants. And if you're small, the large grants aren't necessarily for you. So just wanted to make sure that was.
Yeah, maybe to clarify my point, maybe this would apply as well for large. I think I guess my point would apply not just for how that standard that we've applied on planning, perhaps it should apply for both small and large. Because I think those two questions, have making this inclusive for small and emerging, making sure that we're benefiting has come up both for large and small. So I think you're right, Katie. And I think now the consistency piece is just my question on this. And I'm just trying to, I think, reconcile some of my being a stickler on some issues on the benefits piece. Yeah.
Megan?
My comments more in the first half of Rand pieces and kind of the larger hour-long conversation we've been having. And Sam, I think how you described you all bringing back stuff makes sense to me. I honestly think I'd have to see the transcript of our meeting notes right now, but I did want to kind of just to add to this like pie chart and physical, non-physical, and the third category here is like, I'm still trying to understand these categories and the importance of distinguishing them because so non-physical improvement you said is likely workforce, but could it also be education type projects that aren't workforce development, like education to residents of apartment buildings or homeowners? So it seems, and if it is, then when I read the environmental benefits, it feels like some of those would still apply, like provides meaningful additional non-GHG environmental benefits. Like there could be education on toxic reduction and air quality. And so I guess I still go back to those environmental and social benefits, and I feel like some of them still apply to projects that are not physical improvement. So I guess I'm going back to my earlier advocacy that that would be a simple way to make the pie charts more similar again, would be similar. So that's kind of one thought. And then is retrofitting, is that considered a physical improvement? It's not like construction. Okay, you're just nodding.
It is.
So part of me is these buckets are, you know, I almost wonder if we're like over prescribing these buckets in a way.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I think I don't know what our other goals are for the evening. I'm sure it's probably not our agenda. I personally, as a committee member, am comfortable, unless other people have their hands up right now and don't feel they've been heard, feel like we've given you tons of reaction to this slide, and I would feel okay with waiting to see something next week. And if you need a check-in from us earlier than that in order to get to a decision point, I personally can commit to that because I know we're trying to get to decision making quickly. So that's what I got.
Okay, thank you, Megan. And we are creeping up on 8 o'clock, and we haven't taken a break. Sam, do you want to?
Yeah, let's maybe I'll just you know, Megan, the point around the sort of the categorizations, like it's at some point, you know, I think it's that point that Katie had shared. We've got to kind of draw some of those lines, or you know, based on the kind of project you have, these are the questions we expect you to answer, and we'll certainly go back as a team and think through this, because I think that what I'm hearing is it isn't as much as I wanted it to be a simple change that we could come back and present and update you all and present and share. So this is what the change is. I think that we're going to need to do a little bit and really work through that in detail next, or just at least before we get you to that comfort point, bring that back to you. And I think next week when we come back to you, we'll at least share a little bit more as well about our rationale around why we have the sort of the decision tree, the way that it is in terms of the specific set of questions you may ask. So I think we'll just detail that out along with coming back with these pie charts in a few different ways. So I think we can answer that, because there certainly was a lot of rationale in terms of why we might not have some folks answer those questions, but and we'll lay that out.
Yeah,
okay.
And group math has been really fun.
Let's take a 10-minute break. It's 7:56 now, so let's come back at about 5 or 6 past 8 o'clock. All right, welcome back, everyone.
Okay.
All right, Sam?
Check. Let's see. Yeah, just to see, do we have Renfis, Michael, and Andrea with us yet? No, you don't need to turn on your cameras, just you know you're here. Okay. I think that what we'd like to propose here in terms of coming back to you all next week is, I think, and Katie, can you go back to the previous slide, so at least we can, as much as the visualization may have been painful, we can have visualization in front of us. What we'd like to propose to you all is, I think what we're hearing, and I think it helps, and I appreciate this conversation happening and just making sure that things are consistent across the funds. And fundamentally, you know, we've gone through, we've asked the questions, we've worked through the criteria, and we've gotten those as close to where we're going to go. But with these points here now, what I think we're going to go through is an exercise next week where we come back to you all, and what we're going to propose is that we work through the scoring points across all of the grants, and make sure across all of the grants, planning, small grants, large grants, and across each of those subtypes, with each of those, that at least 50% of the points are associated with reflecting the priority population and serving a priority population. I think, frankly, it's cleaner, it's neater, and that actually is the case with some of the large grants, that it's closer to that just because of the very sets of points. So these 50% of the points are going from there. And what we're gonna suggest is, on the other side, we're gonna hold budget to 10%. So not 10 points, but to 10% across all of those. But what we would ask in order to give us flexibility to pull points, because some questions do just have a singular environmental benefits question. We're asking for flexibility across the other categories though, in order to align it with sort of the importance of that question. So at least we're going to say that 50% we're going to make sure across all of them, at least 50% of the points are consistent for reflecting the priority population you intend to serve and for serving a priority population. And budget is going to be equal to 10% across all of them, so not 10 points. So I want to see if bringing that proposal back and then working through each of them so you see how that breaks out, and we'll have pie charts and graphs and bar graphs and tables. So we'll come ready with a few iterations. But would that work? Seeing thumbs up, and I know we'll have other questions next week. I think that's what we'll work on in order to kind of bring this a little closer and bring a little more comfort and what is real in terms of how folks will perceive some of these things. So I think with that, I had a whole set of other things I may have wanted to say, but maybe I might just hold these other comments for next week. And let us move on to the next piece of the agenda.
Okay. And this might be, I feel like it's always at this time of the 3-hour meeting that I remember why we switched to 2-hour meetings, because I think it can get a little exhausting. So I just want to apologize for that. I will say, so this is a topic that has come up a couple of times. I think Ranfis has mentioned it. I know that Megan has mentioned it in various ways, but we haven't ever really had a conversation about it and asked you all if you wanted to make a decision about it this year. And this isn't something that needs to be decided tonight, obviously, but it's something that we wanted to be able to just kind of like introduce some options and around funding allocation for year one. And so just kind of as a reminder at a really high level, the little donut at the bottom has the target allocations that are in the code that were in the ballot initiative for each of the different funding areas. And then those first 3 bullets are the allocations that you all have already made. So, or have already kind of approved. 1.5 million for planning grants, 400,000 for mini grants, 200,000 to the application support grants. And so that leaves around $6.5 million to grant to sort of small and large grants. So sorry, I'm having trouble advancing my thing. So if there are 2 slides that have just 2 different options. There obviously could be other options that could be brought forth, but these are 2 that are kind of like the 2 basic options, fall into somewhere in between or some iteration of these. One is to make no annual allocation, and that's kind of where we're at right now in terms of like allocating to the different funding areas, and that we would wait for a few years and sort of review what the portfolio of funded grants looks like, and then annually thereafter to evaluate how well we're hitting those targets and kind of do some analysis to think about why we might be off and what that means, and then make adjustments through portfolio balancing, which is something that you all as the committee would do in your final deliberations, and through other mechanisms too. Like you could have targeted solicitations. If after a few years, we had very few applicants who were green infrastructure applicants. We could do like just a solicitation for just those applicants and really do a lot of outreach to develop that. So this is not an exhaustive list of pros and cons, but the pro is that it sort of provides maximum flexibility to fund great projects that come in the door that, you know, we might not know somebody out there is thinking about. Some of the high level cons is that there is a higher level of uncertainty for applicants. And particularly, we're hearing this from the regenerative ag and green infrastructure applicants who kind of hold some concern that they might not compete as well with green or with energy efficiency retrofits and weather, you know, sort of more standard low-income weatherization types of programs or projects. So it would provide a higher level, having no allocation creates more uncertainty for them. There's also the potential for us to get really far away from the targets that are in the code and have kind of a hard time getting back to them. And it's a lot heavier reliance on the committee to be making those decisions in an ongoing way, and kind of that responsibility falls just much more heavily, falls much more heavily on you all to make those adjustments and track that over time. So the second option is to set some minimum allocation. So this is just an example, but you could say, like, for each target area, we're going to say we will fund at least 50% of the higher range of the target that was in the initiative. So this year, with $6.5 million available for small and large grants, it kind of breaks down like those sub-bullets show. So it would be at least 1.95 million for clean energy, at least 812,500 for workforce, at least just under 500,000 for regenerative ag and green infrastructure. So some of the pros of that is that it helps to ensure we don't get too far away from the targets in the initiative, and it also offers some level of assurance to applicants in those different funding bucket areas. And some of the cons is that it is less flexible. We might miss an opportunity to fund a great project. And that is it. Mostly we just wanted to kind of like introduce that, to bring that conversation to the fore, because it's something that committee members have mentioned, and we as staff have had some conversations about, but we haven't asked you directly, do you want to make a decision about this year? And so I guess I know that this is kind of like new information, and we definitely don't, we're definitely not asking you to make a decision, but I would like to ask, like, if there are any initial thoughts on having an allocation, setting an allocation this year, if there is any information you feel like you need from us, like us to provide, to bring to you to help inform that decision, and just open it up to the committee. Robin?
Yeah, thanks for putting this together. I guess I'm kind of reviewing those two options, just some high-level thoughts. One, I think for year one or year zero, I think it's really important for us to be as flexible as possible. So I like the flexibility and being able to accommodate, since we have really no idea what we're going to expect in terms of the applications that are coming in. And so, for that, I'm leaning towards option two, setting some minimum threshold or minimum funding commitment, so that applicants know that there is at least some money in the pool. Maybe 50% is a little bit high. If we drop it down to 25% or 33%, a third, It gives us that little additional flexibility, but still allows, for some minimum funding commitments. I don't know how I feel about the exact number yet, but, I think we should consider playing around with whether it's 50%, 20%, 30%, whatever that number, that's something that, can be discussed. And then I guess the final thought I have is, I think it feels to me that waiting 3 years to revisit this it just seems a long time, at least for the first year or two. So I'd like to be able to review this, next year and see how things went. Maybe there was absolutely no grant applications in one area. So what do we do about it? Or no funding in one area. So what do we do about it? So I'd like to be able to revisit for at least the next year, maybe 2 years, and then from there, consider, when things have stabilized a little bit, consider a longer time frame. So those are my initial thoughts on what you shared.
Thanks, Robin. Faith?
I think I largely agree with Robin, so I don't need to take up much space, but I just did want to thank you for bringing this. I think it's a really important, it's really important for us, for this decision to be made before the applications go out, because it's a really important indicator, obviously, to the applicants and to the kinds of projects we're hoping to create. One of the cons that had occurred to me if we went with option 2, especially if we went with option 2 this year, is we may not get the money out the door. Right? Because we may not get any projects that fall within one of those buckets. And I think that would be a real miss for us in this year to not get all the money out the door. I love the idea of maintaining, especially for this, I love, Robin, how you said it, 0 year, that we maintain ultimate flexibility. And I do think that we might want that ultimate flexibility again for another year when we have a larger grant pool and have a better sense of what kind of applications we're going to be getting. And, the state of the world perhaps is less groundless, I don't know, next year. But I do like the idea of revisiting the decision again before we put out another round of applications. So thanks again for raising it.
Michael?
Can I see the previous slide by any chance?
Yeah, of course.
So I guess that my thoughts on this is I like the idea of setting the minimum allocations. I think that we could set it as an aspirational thing too, so that there is flexibility built into it. But I'm looking at that and I'm doing quick math. That's $2.5 million. So at least $4 million of flexibility in that in our year 0. And I would like to see that, like, I kind of worry that like regenerative ag might just like not get as much, or the workforce development doesn't get as much, but if there aren't any applications in it, then I think we should be able to move that bucket of money, right? So if we have 812,000 set aside for workforce and we get 100,000 worth of requests, I think we should be able to move that other 700 to something else, right? But I think we should aim to like set aside that 812 and the $500,000 for regen and the $2 million for minimum on clean energy. I think those would be good set asides to have, with that if we don't get those amount of applications, that we can move that money to other places for the first year.
Thanks. Megan?
Yeah, thanks for bringing this to us. I agree with Faith. It's super important. And I've appreciated Robin, like all the people before me's comments. And I kind of wonder what Michael's saying and what Robin said, make me think there's like a hybrid. So I guess if this is a proposal, like a revision of the proposal that I'm liking this number 2 for the reasons that Michael explained, but I wonder if we can create the flow chart like you described, where if there were not enough applications, we can reallocate, and then kind of create annual or some sort of checkpoints. But I think in the first year, I agree that might be a little different in future years, but in the first year, I'd like to kind of check in earlier. I do want to get the money out the door. So I wonder if that's how we can modify number 2 in the way that in option number 2, to make sure that we still get money out the door, even if it doesn't come in. Although quite honestly, from the amazing success, kudos to James, that I heard that we had in the planning assistance, or sorry, the application assistance fund, or I think, I'm not that worried about not getting, it sounds like, I don't think we should be that worried about not getting applications, but I guess we don't know. So I guess I'm proposing, not in great language, some sort of modification to number 2.
Ramsey?
Can I propose another pie chart to explain this? But I'm also leaning on option 2. You know, I think if I were a grant writer applicant, I would probably ask these questions. I would want to know how much dollars are being allocated, how many groups are you planning to fund? And I think in option 1, it feels too big and too nebulous that I think I do see that concern. And I think this provides more clarity. And I think if I were any organization, whether I have a development director, a grant writer, or no, you know, all volunteer led, you know, I would probably really want to know if submitting an application is worth my time investment. And I think providing this helps create a clear answer around return on investment in time to submit an application. And you know, I like where Megan was heading in terms of if there's a hybrid option to give, you know, maybe some more flexibility. But yeah, that's, I think, where I'm currently leaning right now.
Andrea?
No, I guess I can't be the only person here who's been entirely grant funded. Our criteria were always, did it match a minimum, like did the award amount match a minimum amount of money? And you know, for me right now, it's $75,000. So like there might only be 4 awards, but if they are at least enough money to make it worthwhile, if you get them, then cool, go for it. I mean, I would say, I would encourage the committee to think in terms of multiple years. This is a decades-long project, we hope. And, you know, maybe in the beginning, the committee ends up funding a lot of job training projects because we really need to build a workforce to do this. And a huge amount of the money goes towards workforce development. And as that workforce comes together and builds skills, and those workers go out and create businesses that can do this work, or create nonprofits that can do this work and staff that work, they compile a lot more capital improvement or innovation grants. So I think what's the time scale of the goal might be really important to think about.
Robin?
Yeah, I just wanted a quick follow-up on Megan's comments about the hybrid. One thought that came to mind was, you know, setting up a hybrid model where the allocation floor or ceilings in terms of the amounts is somehow tied to the number of applications or the value of applications that kind of come in. I know that starts getting a little bit trickier, but at least that way, if we have 90%, you know, applications coming in for clean energy, we take that into account in addition to the donut graph that you guys have, and somehow determine some minimum or maximum allocation for that. So just a thought to throw out there is you know, assigning the ceilings or the floors of allocations based upon the applications that we get in.
Ramsey?
Sorry, I think I left my hand up. yeah, I mean, maybe only to add to that, you know, you could probably create ranges for each of these categories. You know, what you would expect to fund for regen or workforce, so that it builds in that flexibility in the front end. So it's not a commitment of we'll just fund 48.7 for regen, but maybe it's a range. You just do it for each category, and then we just do the final adjustment when we know, as we're scoring and identifying where the needs are, and what are the potential missed opportunities if and using those ranges as the flexibility.
Michael?
Are we, I probably just forgot this, are we doing multi-year grants this year, or are we wait until next year?
We are doing multi-year grants.
Okay, thank you.
Faith?
I really appreciate all your comments, and you guys have just certainly swayed me off what I felt like I was pretty passionate about, staying as flexible as possible in year one. So thanks everybody for those comments. Really well thought. I do, and this is it, I guess it's probably in reaction, Robin, to your scales and things moving around, but I really encourage us to keep this as simple as possible, especially in year one. We had so much feedback when we put out the draft application that we had made things complicated, and that was a barrier. And if the purpose of doing allocations, and it seems to me like a really good purpose of doing allocations would be to give some certainty to potential applicants, then scales and things I think would be really burdensome. So I would encourage us, at least in year one, not to do that.
So I think this is a good start to the conversation. We can, what I would, and I really appreciate this feedback in terms of, I think that there's, I think what Katie spoke to here is, even with the minimums here, Katie, remind me, there is about another 4 million sort of unspoken for after these minimums or something of that. I'm sure I'm doing my math right.
This is more public math. It's about 3.5 million. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. So I think maybe that as you think about sort of seeing these minimums and then seeing sort of that extra, that unspoken for that can be used across the other funds, maybe just think about that because what we're hearing is interest in this conversation. What we're hearing is interest in this, and as we come back, we'll just want to refine that and get a little closer to what feels like an appropriate level of flexibility and an appropriate level of certainty for our applicants.
Randy?
I guess I wonder, just trying to play this out systemically, if we stick with option 1. So my understanding is, as we receive these applications, these will all be reviewed within subcommittees or different review committees, and we'll all make our recommendations, push forward. So within each of those committees, are we going to review multiple applications, different things, all of the buckets, if you will, or will certain committees have a very specific focus on regen and clean energy? So that's one kind of question as I'm trying to play out this scenario. And then I guess the second scenario I'm trying to play out is, it seems like whatever that structure is, as we aggregate all the different scores and see which applications race to the top, or yeah, if you will, what do we do in that scenario where maybe the regen folks were right? Maybe there is a application bias against their favor. How do we address that? And do we adjust that, or do we hold to the scoring, objective scoring structure that we try to set up. So those are like two kind of questions I'm playing out. I don't think I need a specific answer now, but that's what I'm trying to grapple in the system that we're building right now.
Michael?
I'm going to throw another question out that I don't expect to get an answer to. But if we get way more than our $6.5 million in amazing grants that we're like, we want to fund, are we going to roll those over to next year? Any unfunded ones?
Sam, he did say he didn't expect an answer.
just out there in the ether.
Yeah.
Well, maybe what I'll just say is that those design discussions, around next year, there's a good chunk we're expecting to learn out of this year. And obviously we expect next year to take different form, and the questions and the caps and everything will shift and change. So there's an element of it that they may perfectly be able to roll over, but I suspect that you all may have enough learnings that you may want to ask different questions. You may want to ask them. Their materials will be there, but you may want to ask them to reapply. So I think that'll be a discussion for you all to come back to. But I think a lot of what we talked about is that we'll come and learn, and I have no doubt that we'll make changes into this that may make their application a little different again. But I guess maybe what I will just share, Michael, to your point, is because of, I think, where what the funding levels are this year, folks are taking that into account in their proposals. And so, I think there's a combination of things that's going to happen. You will be funding fewer organizations, and fewer projects that probably were good projects, but you just can't fund because we don't have as much funds that in a $40 million, $50 million a year you would fund. So there's going to be some of that. And I think you're going to also see just scopes adjusted for to line up with what folks think they can get based on this year, whereas you'll see folks come back that apply this year that'll come back next year with multi-million-dollar proposals.
Megan?
Well, it is a side comment, but since Michael raised it, I think it's probably something we should chat about as a committee, is what we do with recipients that don't get funded. And just off the bat, I'd like to think that we give them feedback and somehow that's marked in future years. And, because so that we can see improvements. And I feel like that would matter in future years. But anyway, it's probably something we should bookmark for a conversation soon before the applications go out. Although I don't know if we have to decide it before the first round, but it does seem important, but perhaps not one we should spend too much time on if you're trying to get us to decide this thing.
Rancis?
I think my only comment is I think, one, we should definitely expect to see more applications than we can fund, and that we should probably definitely expect that we will likely see a lot of great applications that we can't fund either. There's just going to be a lot of great projects. I think we should try to set that expectation ahead of time, that in any grant making process, there's always going to be a disappointment that we cannot get X or Y group funded. And I think we should expect that. And I think some of the questions that Michael and others are raising, I think it's something that we should wrestle with for sure. But I think we should have that expectation going in that there's just going to be more groups applying than we can fund. With that said, I do want to lay out a systemic issue here. If we are breaking these off into different scoring panels, and depending on how we do break out the applications, there is going to be a challenge around consistency on how we score. Though the scoring and the weights will be the same, each panel, depending on who's comprised within each panel, the way that I score a 9 is going to be different for how someone else scores a 9 or a 10 or a 5. So you know, I think the most important for me personally, the most important, one of the, I think, more important things is for any applicant is consistent scoring. And so I think as I'm saying that, you know, I don't want to be too overly prescriptive on the solution here as we consider option 1 and 2, but I think it'll be, you know, I think the original idea of the scoring panel is we're going to have a huge load of applications that we can't all score them together, hence bringing it apart. And so I think we should consider making sure as we break applications apart, how we're doing that, and whether they're in themes or not. It does feel distinct to this question, but I do feel like it's still related. And I think it does also could overall impact the volumes of applications we receive in each category or not, if that's something we're already hearing from applicants. Sorry for if that's a little rambly, but I think I just want to make sure that we do have those expectations that we're going to be, limited in terms of how many groups we can fund this year. And even the case will be, I think, likely next year.
Thanks, Francis. And I would just want to note that one of the things that one of the comments that Sam was is now holding until next time when we can kind of after we revisit the small and planning grants is around the review process and kind of revisiting some of those conversations that we had around the panel, how the panels are formed, what kinds of applications they get, making sure that inter-rater reliability is looked at so that we don't have the problem that you described where, like, you know, I might be a super generous scorer and somebody else might just be like generally score lower across the board. So I think that those are important things that we definitely intend to bring back to the committee after the sort of we close out the small and the application conversations. So I feel like we got some good feedback on sort of some different pros and cons that we hadn't thought of, and some of your kind of initial reactions to having a funding allocation or to sort of making some sort of a choice that way. I think that we can talk as staff and then maybe bring back some more information and potentially a recommended path forward to discuss at the next meeting. Does that feel like it makes sense to you, Sam, and to folks on the committee?
Excellent. Thank you, Katie.
Okay. All right. Well, that was the last thing on our agenda tonight, guys. And so, Sam, did you have any closing comments before committee member comments?
No, just, you know, hope everyone's looking after each other and taking care of yourselves.
Are we doing the minutes or did I miss that?
Oh, Maria, thank you so much. This is what happens. I'm going to blame the pandemic for everything. Did you all have a chance to review the minutes that I sent you only earlier today? So I'm seeing some general nods. So if there are any, does anybody have any changes, comments, edits, corrections? All right, we will call those approved. I feel like I should show you the piece of paper where I wrote minutes down and circled it and then still didn't get to it. So,
all right, we got your back.
Thank you.
For...
Thank you, Maria. Yes. So are there any other committee member comments? Megan?
Yeah, I snuck it in earlier, but I did want to circle back to the beginning presentation by James. And I think that's a really great success. I forgot how many you said different organizations applied for the, remind me, Katie.
Over 120.
That's,
application for grants.
And you also mentioned that like a lot were from Black and Indigenous led organizations and ones who weren't necessarily familiar with PCEF. And I'm just really grateful for the staff's outreach effort and the really careful and thoughtful relationship building you've been doing. And that sounds like a great success to me. I don't know how other committee members feel, but I guess the moment passed and we didn't have, I think we weren't warmed up yet and didn't acknowledge it. And I just want to say kudos. And I think that's great. And I don't know if other folks have anything to add to that. So thanks for the hard work and to the staff for all their hard work on many fronts. But that's an area where that really shined to me. And I see lots of applauses. It's really sweet.
Ramsey?
Oh, I think Megan beat me to the punch. I just wanted to extend my appreciation and love to staff for all the tremendous amount of work doing all this. You know, I think during the pandemic, building a grant making program in a small amount of time, wrestling with all the different questions that we as a committee are raising, but even communities raising. I think you generally make us feel like we are being listened to, and I think it's a great culture that you and the team are building, and I appreciate all that. And I think I just continue to wish you all good self-care and all this work that you're doing as life continues here. So just want to thank you all for all this hard work.
Thank you, Ramsey. Thank you to the team. Thank you, James. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, Janet. Thank you all. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Night.
Thanks,
And
folks.
Good night, everyone.
Night.
Have a good evening.
Same bat channel.
Good night.